Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you've had a great day and are about to settle down to part 2 of our story tonight. But before you do, go and get yourself something lovely to drink, something refreshing or something warm, depending on what the weather is like where you are. And let's continue with part 2 of our story. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. Yes, I think that must be it. That is what I expect happened. She must have seen you lying fast asleep on the sand lounger, and she probably didn't want to disturb you. If it were me, I wouldn't want to wake you up either. It was kind of her to pick up the ginger for you, though. You must infuse some of it in a cup of hot water and drink it. It'll make your stomach feel so much better. Gingers always help me in that way, especially if I'm having stomach problems. I'll be around in the morning to give you some of the sauerkraut my mother makes. And that should also help you, I think.
That's very sweet of you, dear. But in the meantime, I will go ahead and make some of that ginger tea you're talking about, that Sheila left for me so kindly. You really think the sauerkraut will help me, love? You say it's full of natural probiotics. Is that right?
Yes, it is. But I'm just concerned about you, Julie. It's not the pickled cabbage that I'm worried about. It's all this talking about your passing out in the woods like this. Fainting, I mean. It's not resting easy with me. I think you need to make an appointment with Dr. Larkin as soon as possible. First thing in the morning would be a good idea. Your collapse in the woods, Julie, it needs to be investigated. I suspect you're run down, and maybe you took too much on after the flu. I mean, you were out cold for a very long time, which is very worrying. I'm happy to take you to see Dr. Larkin myself if you like. I mean, after that fainting spell of yours, I'm not actually sure if it's safe for you to drive on your own. My mother won't mind me driving you in her car. She's placed me on her insurance cover, you know.
You're a sweetheart, Cara. I would like that very much. I think I'll take you up on your offer. You could drive me to see Dr. Larkin. I'll enjoy your company along the way. I'll do what you say. I'll give the surgery a call in the morning to make that important appointment. You can't be too careful at my age, can you?
Boy, I'm glad, Julie, you're finally seeing sense. You can be so stubborn at times, you know. I'll drop around in the morning with the pickled cabbage for you.
That will be lovely, dear. I'll see you then. I look forward to it. After you've taken me to see Dr. Larkin, we could go out for a spot to eat or something. It'll be my treat, of course.
Little did I know, those would be her last words to me. The next morning over the breakfast table, I shared with my mother about Julie Warrington's bad stomach and how she'd passed out in the woods while walking her golden retriever Bertie and had been out cold for many hours.
Goodness gracious me, said my mother. The woman is 81 years old. She's only recently recovered from the flu, has she not? She should be taking things easy. She needs to watch herself. You can't be too cautious at that age. At the very least, she should take her cell phone in the woods with her, so she can contact someone if she's not feeling good. But I notice Julie Warrington never has her cell phone on her. She's from that generation that still can't get to grips with modern technology. I don't like the thought of her wandering around the woods on her own like that, especially if she's in a fragile condition. It's worrying to think of her out cold for so many hours. It puts her in an extremely vulnerable position. I hope you told her she needs to see a doctor at once.
Of course I did, Mum. I told Julie to make an appointment this morning to see Dr. Larkin. She thinks we should go off and have some lunch afterwards. It seems like a great idea. I told her I was sure you wouldn't mind me borrowing your car and taking her to see the doctor myself. You don't mind, do you?
Of course I don't mind. You're driving Julie to her appointment. In fact, I insist upon it. I wouldn't dream of allowing the woman to drive herself to the surgery, especially if she's been fainting all the time. It would be dangerous for her to drive in such a precarious condition, especially if it were to happen again. She needs to be examined, that's for sure, by the doctor to check nothing nefarious is going on with her health. I can drive her myself if you like. I can drive you both and pick you up later if you'd prefer.
I'd prefer to take her myself, Mum, if you don't mind. Julie's such a good friend of mine. I'm not sure she'll be comfortable with you. She doesn't know you like she knows me.
You're probably right. Point taken, Cara. It's extraordinary how attached you are to Julie Warrington these days, said my mother with an expression of worry growing on her face. I think it's absolutely marvellous that with such a large generation gap between the two of you, you are both so close. But I do worry about your heart being broken one of these days, Cara, when Julie is no longer around. I honestly do not know how that woman rattles around in that large, oversized Victorian house of hers, all on her own. But I would say, beyond that fainting spell she had in the woods, she is in remarkably good shape for a woman of her advancing years. If I can look like her when I reach my 80s, I'll be a very happy woman indeed. My biggest concern with Julie is the fact that your friend sleeps in her upstairs bedroom. Think about that, Cara, for a moment. That woman has to traipse up and down that steep staircase of hers every morning and evening. I do worry that one day she could potentially fall. I told Julie that once, but she was resolutely stubborn about sleeping in her upstairs bedroom. She told me she liked sleeping upstairs and had done so all her life. It was a bedroom that she shared with her husband, you see. She says she feels close to him in that bedroom. Claims she feels his energy in there. So what could I say to that? I guess Julie doesn't want to change the habits of a lifetime, which is understandable. I appreciate that. But when you get older, you need to be wary of stairs. She told me she was careful going up and down the staircase, but it takes one time, just one time, when Bertie's left his ball lying on the staircase, or one of his teddy bears, perhaps. She doesn't see it. And let's face it, her eyesight is not what it used to be. So she trips over it, succumbing to a bad fall. Stuff like that can happen all the time. How do I know? Because in my youthful days I was a nurse, and you have no idea how many elderly people took tumbles down staircases, tripped over dogs' bones, or God knows what else. And I think that this staircase of Julie's is a tragedy that could so easily happen, if she doesn't pay due attention, that is.
Mum, please don't talk like that. You're tempting fate. Julie is very careful, I can promise you that. I'm sure she's very aware of how precarious that staircase of hers is. So she's probably very cautious when she goes up and down it.
Sweetheart, being cautiously careful means nothing at all. I hate to burst your bubble like this, but accidents do happen to the most nimble among us, and when we least expect it. If you went flying down the staircase, for example, you might be all right, given your young age and obvious resilience to bounce back. But when you get to Julia Warrington's age, the body is not so forgiving.
Mum, she's lived in that old Victorian house all her life, and it's her beloved home. She's attached to it. She likes sleeping upstairs. But you do make some valid points, I think. I will encourage her to invest in getting a chairlift, perhaps, so that going up and down the staircase won't be so risky for her. I think I should persuade her on this. She might listen to me, actually.
Make sure you speak to her about this, love. It's a very good idea that you do, because I am rather concerned about her.
I worry too, Mum, but I see her all the time. I always thought it was a dreadful pity she didn't have anyone living on the property to look out for her. I asked her about her daughter Ivor, who lives in Florida, but Ivor is apparently fiercely independent and travels all over the world, and she'd never dream of moving in with her mother. Ivor, I believe, has told Julie on numerous occasions to sell up the old Victorian house, because she claims it's far too big for her.
And she's right, of course she is. Let me guess, said my mother, rolling her eyes. Julie will have none of it. She's a tough old bird, and no one can push her around, can they? But still, It must get awfully lonely for her living in a huge house like that all alone.
I don't think Julie gets lonely, Mum. She's resourcefully independent. She enjoys her own company. And she's got Bertie. And Bertie's a great companion for her. I'm sure it helps having a lively dog around the place. And don't forget, I visit her regularly. She says I've become like a second daughter to her. And she tells me being around me makes her feel youthful again. Besides anything else, I love being in her company.
I do believe it's wonderful, dear, that you have a great relationship with Julie Warrington. But just don't get too attached to her, that's all I'm saying. Losing someone you care about dearly can be very hard. I was very close to my grandmother, you know, when she was alive. Delightful woman she was. She died before my 20th birthday from breast cancer, and it absolutely broke my heart into smithereens. I still haven't got over her loss all these years later, and sometimes when I think about her, I just tear up. I can't help myself. She was to me, I rather suspect, what Julie Warrington is to you. I wish you'd known her in life. She was such a lovely dear.
Mum, quit worrying about my emotional well-being, will you? I'm grown up. I know Julie Warrington isn't going to be around forever. I will be heartbroken when she's gone, but I have to accept the unfortunate fact that death is very much a part of our lives. We all have to deal with it at some point, but I'd rather not think about such macabre stuff right now. I want to enjoy every moment I have left with Julie Warrington. I'm just worried about her collapsing in the woods. That's really been bothering me. She's recovered from the flu, and I just don't think she has fully recovered, although she insists that she has. Hopefully when I take her to see Dr. Larkin, he'll knock some good sense into her and make her realise she's been overdoing things of late.
You're very wise for your years, love. I'm extremely proud of you. I suppose our modern-day culture really doesn't appreciate death as we should. It's a bit of a taboo subject, I rather suspect. We don't like to embrace the subject of death. It's far too uncomfortable for us, when I must admit other cultures around the world are much more accepting of it. Maybe we have something to learn from such people.
Mum, can we stop talking about death, please? It's so morbid. Just so you know, I told Julie I'd bring her some of your pickled cabbage if that's all right. She needs some natural probiotics in her system. She claims her stomach has been giving her all kinds of problems.
Well, that's a very good idea, dear. Of course you must give her some of my homemade pickled cabbage. But by the sounds of things, she needs the attention of a doctor, and as soon as possible as far as I'm concerned. She's still extremely wobbly after the flu. Give her my regards, will you? And tell her I hope she's feeling a lot better soon.
Will do so, I said, hurriedly grabbing the bottle of red pickled cabbage and leaving the house by way of the back kitchen door. Before long I was sidling up the tree-lined driveway that swept towards Julie Warrington's home. At this time of the morning, the asymmetrical Victorian house, with its grey slate roof and large bay windows, stood up proud and tall, looking fetching under the soft ethereal light that cast the whole house under a rather forgiving lens, so some of its dazzling imperfections, such as the peeling paint on one corner of the house, along with some rotting wood in some of the windows, was glossed over, almost as if they didn't exist at all. What I did notice that morning, however, was the energy of the house was almost morose. It seemed to nudge me, like a warning whisper. Everything seemed deathly quiet, as if the entire house was holding its breath for a brief moment. I cautiously made my rather reluctant approach towards the arched front door, but something about the morning distinctly put me on edge, and I couldn't think what it was. I could not shake off the uneasiness that seemed to cling to me, like a nervous, demure child, holding on to my skirt and refusing to let go. Prickles of dread ran down my spine, like a rush of icy cold air, and every single hair on my body was standing up on edge, shouting loudly into the silence that something was terribly, terribly wrong. My whole body was drenched with an ominous feeling of foreboding, as if I had broken out into a sweat on a very hot day. I told myself, of course, to pull myself together. I was being utterly ridiculous. My mother had been talking about the fact that Julie wouldn't be around forever, and how she needed to watch that staircase of hers, because she could potentially fall. And now my mother's words were blossoming in my mind into all kinds of horrifying scenarios that had no bearing on reality whatsoever. Well, so I thought. I shook my entire body as I tried to loosen the grip of tightness that had gathered around my neck and shoulder areas. I stood still for a brief moment, looking at the front door, almost afraid to knock. I jingled the bell, and then I knocked, and I drew in a deep breath as I waited to hear Julie's cheerful, upbeat voice calling out, "I'm coming, dear. Wait a moment." A couple of Julie's wind chimes were swinging wildly in the soft breeze. I turned around very suddenly. Something was watching me from the woods. I was certain of it. And whatever it was evil. Unquestionably evil. When I glanced towards the tall, lofty trees that fringed the borders of Julia's property, I couldn't see anything. Nothing at all. I shivered nervously as my beady eyes searched the trees more intently. I scanned the grove for any possible sign of movement, for the feeling of being watched persisted. That was when I saw it. What seemed to be like the most ghastly, gargantuan white face. It looked skull-like, and they were huge hollows in the eye area, and it was staring at me from the shadows, seemingly crouched on all fours with long, thin legs. What the hell? What did I see? I couldn't have seen that. I blinked my eyes for a second, opening them up again very gingerly, but the thing I thought I'd seen watching me was all but gone. Silly me, I told myself. It was probably just a trick of the light, that's all. Something that looked like a face, but it wasn't anything at all. It's so easy to be deceived by all the shadows in the woods at this time of the morning. I chastened myself for being so unreasonably nervous this morning. What on earth was wrong with me? I was now seeing things that weren't even there. The trees seemed to jiggle their leafy heads as a soft breeze was teasing them, as they swayed to the music of their own celestial songs. I rang the bell again and knocked. Bertie barked frenziedly. He began to scratch frantically at the inside door, something he'd never done before. I saw a flash of movement at the window and realized Bertie had flung himself onto the couch, and his dark eyes were peering at me outside the window, his nose eagerly smudging the glass pane. Bertie began to bark again. Where was Julie, I wondered? She didn't take this long to get to the door, and besides anything else, she hated it when Bertie barked so incessantly. She would have told him by now to stop, but there seemed to be no sign of her. What was going on? Maybe Julie was around the back, I thought, but usually Bertie was at her side. Something was seriously off. I just knew it in every single fibre of my being. It wasn't a good feeling. I could feel the vile, repugnant taste of nausea rising up in the back of my throat that made me desperately want to brush my teeth immediately with a minty toothpaste. My stomach was churning like a food processor on full throttle, and the sense of grave disquiet within me grew like a rampant, out-of-control vine that strangles a retainer wall at will. Bertie's barks made the nausea far worse. I thought I was going to be violently sick. Something was definitely amiss. I knew it was. I could feel it in every fibre of my being. I continued to knock at the front door apprehensively. I rang the bell 6 times, calling out Julie's name. Julie! Julie, it's me, Cara. Are you there, Julie? But there was no response. Maybe she just had another fainting spell, I told myself. Possibly she'd blacked out, like she'd done in the woodgrove. With that horrifying thought in mind, I hurriedly ran to the back of the house as fast as I could, and up the steps of the wraparound porch. I was completely out of breath, my heart pounding violently in my chest. The steps squeaked under my light weight, and some of the rotting wood crumbled beneath my feet. The back door was locked. I shook it for a brief moment, feeling frustration that I couldn't get into the house quickly enough. But then I remembered Julie kept a spare key for the back door in her planter. I fiddled around in the planter, almost giving up. But then I found the key, and that was when I opened the door, which creaked as it swung open. Bertie flung himself ebulliently into my arms, almost knocking me over. He was so very pleased to see me. I stood there in the house, calling out Julie's name again. Julie! Julie, it's me, Cara! Are you all right? Julie, are you all right? Once again, the only thing that greeted me was an ominous silence and the sounds of Bertie's tail thumping the floor. Bertie whimpered and began to lead me through the entrance hall. I followed him, knowing something was terribly wrong. I was very fearful of what I would find. And sure enough, I found it. For there, lying at the bottom of the grand sweeping staircase, with a baseball bat at her side, was my good friend Julie Warrington. She was lying in a lifeless, crumpled heap, her eyes staring up at the ceiling like grey marbles. At that moment I stood there unflinchingly, as I took in the scene before me, being unable to comprehend what I was actually beholding. And then panic set in, and the only thought in my head was, please God, don't let Julie be dead. But deep down in my gut, I knew my very worst fears were being silently confirmed, although I didn't want to believe it for a second. The scene that had stretched out before me, like the most dreadful nightmare, spoke words that were never verbally articulated, but I knew at once what had happened, almost as if the house itself was playing out the night's sequence of events, rather like a movie. Julie had taken a tumble down the staircase, and this unfortunate fall had been fatal. I reached down to grab Julie's limp arm, just to feel for a pulse in case I was wrong about this, but as I expected, there was nothing. And when I looked at my dear friend, I realized she was definitely gone. Her body was completely cold, and rigor mortis was beginning to set in. My mother's fears about Julie Warrington's sweeping staircase imposing a potential threat to her personal safety had been like an ominous prognostication, as now my friend was gone, and it was devastating to realize I'd never ever see her again. Nothing had prepared me for losing Julie Warrington, especially not in this untimely way, so it hit me cruelly hard. I didn't wonder what Julie had been doing with the baseball bat at her side when I'd found her, but when I spoke to Julie's daughter Ivor at her funeral, she told me what had happened on the night of her mother's death, and then I was able to perfectly understand why Julie Warrington had died with a baseball bat at her side. "You must be Cara Trussler," she said to me with a kind smile. "My mother spoke so fondly of you, you know. She told me you were like another daughter to her. With my living in Florida, always travelling abroad for many of my business assignments, it was reassuring to know that she had such an attentive next-door neighbour such as yourself, always looking out for her. I appreciate what you did for my mother. She told me how you made her chicken soup when she was sick, looking in on her 3 times a day, shopping for her and walking her dog. You were a very good friend to her." "Your mother was more than a friend to me. She was incredibly special. She was like a grandmother figure in my life. We were very close," I admitted. Although I knew about Julie's daughter Ivor, I'd never had the privilege of meeting her in person, so it was good to finally make her acquaintance. Julie had sometimes visited Ivor in Florida and stayed from time to time with her for a couple of weeks or so, usually over Thanksgiving or Christmas. Never once had Ivor visited her mother here in North Carolina, even though the old Victorian house had once been her family home, where she'd been raised as a girl. Julie had told me all about her daughter, describing her as an ambitious, independent and headstrong woman, and at one glance at her, I knew she was all those things and more. She was not exactly what I would describe as the most approachable of people. Ivor had never got married. Julie had told me once she never wanted to be tied down to a traditional marriage. She liked to jet-set around the globe as an independent journalist, visiting war-torn parts of the globe, like the Congo and Afghanistan, places like that, where she'd file her reports and write articles for the press. I think Ivor Warrington loved her mother Julie, but she didn't appear to be an emotional type by any manner of means. But I guess journalists by nature are hard-wired to be thick-skinned. which can make them come across as extremely unlikable. It was clear to me that Ivor Warrington kept her feelings very much in check, which made both my parents, who met her at the funeral, believe she was as cold as a fish, with zero personality. "She's a typical journalist," my mother had said. "I don't like her at all. I don't understand how someone as sweet and as kind as Julie Warrington could have a daughter like that. So heartless she is. No wonder Julia's daughter never married. Imagine settling down with the likes of her." I thought my mother's remarks had been unnecessarily unkind. I personally thought that Ivor Warrington was a person who was just extremely private, very guarded perhaps, but that didn't make her as cold-hearted as my mother was making her out to be. But maybe she gave off that unfortunate vibe because she was so reticent. Ivor studied me for a brief moment. I thought I saw a flicker of emotions in her eyes that she was trying to suppress or hide, so maybe she wasn't as stone-cold as she first appeared. But when I shared those thoughts with my mother later, it certainly didn't soften my mother's heart towards the woman. "You're just being nice, dear, because she's Julie's daughter, that's all. But I'm sorry, you're not going to change my mind on that. I didn't take to her at all. She's a typical journalist as far as I'm concerned, and they're among the most cold-hearted people you can hope to meet." Ivor looked at me and said, "I understand, Cara, that you were the one to find my mother at the bottom of the staircase. I'm so very sorry you had to witness that. Really, I am. I believe you were the one to call the emergency services. She was very lucky to have a friend like you, Cara, who was always looking out for her well-being. Knowing that, with my being in Florida, was very reassuring for me. After the phone call my mother made to me on the night of her death, I was resolutely determined to get here as soon as I possibly could. My mother was in a dreadful state that night. I hadn't been home for many years, you know, but I knew something was up with her by the way she seemed to be panicking on the call with me. She seemed very fragile after that bout of flu, I have to say, even though she assured me she was fine. But I could hear she was anything but. So I intended to come home as quickly as I could, to check on her myself, and I wish I'd got here sooner. Then none of this may have happened." "You say she was in a state when she phoned you during the night? She phoned you at night? On the night she died?" I asked. "Was she having fainting spells or something? Did she say she'd blacked out? Is that what was going on? Maybe that's why she fell down the staircase. Maybe she fainted." Ivor looked at me strangely, as if she didn't know what on earth I was talking about. I rather suspected that Julie, being Julie, who was inclined to be obstinately stubborn at the best of times, certainly didn't want to involve her daughter Ivor in telling her about the accident that occurred in the woods when she fainted. I think she'd probably have been scared that Ivor would push her to move to a retirement village or something like that. Anyone could see Ivor was a no-nonsense type of person who probably wouldn't take no for an answer. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to get into an argument with the likes of her, as I know I would have ended up drawing the short end of the straw. There was something quite headmistressy about Ivor, and I think a lot of people would have been rather intimidated by her. Even though underneath her hardened veneer, I'm sure she was a pussycat really. But try telling that to my mother, who wouldn't have believed a word of that for a second. Julie had often said that her daughter Ivor was misunderstood. Many people thought she was as hard as nails, and I could see why. I assumed that if Julie had dared to mention her precarious condition to Ivor when she had passed out in the woods, Ivor would have insisted she was too old to live in the house on her own, and would make sure that she sold the place, ostensibly for Julie losing her independence and leaving her beloved Victorian home she loved so much would not be something she'd be willing to do without putting up a fight. Julie told me on many occasions that Ivor had begged her to move to a retirement village in Florida so she could keep an eye on her mother. She'd offered to cover all her mother's financial expenses and pay for the retirement home, but Julie had been too proud to accept her daughter's help, and she didn't want to anyway. She wanted to stay where she was. Ivor looked at me with a confused expression on her face, as if she didn't know what on earth I was talking about.
Oh, my mother's never fainted a day in her life. And I'm quite sure she didn't faint when she fell over the staircase, if that's what you're implying. I think she must have tripped over something, or failed to see a step. She's got very bad eyesight these days, so that's probably what happened. Anyway, when I spoke to her on the phone that night, she was rattled. Actually, I'm under-exaggerating. She was extremely rattled. Something scared her very badly. I've never known her to be so overwrought before. I think that recent bout of flu she experienced has made her feel extremely vulnerable, living in the old house on her own, I rather suspect.
She called you in the middle of the night. You say she was rattled. What was she scared of? I asked.
Well, she was just very scared, said Ivor. You should have heard her voice. She was actually whispering down the phone, asking me what she should do. I'm sure you know my mother is not the hysterical type, but I could hear she was extremely distressed, and with my being so far away, I felt completely helpless, because how could I help her? I don't know why she didn't call the police if she was feeling so insecure, but for some reason she called me. And she's never done a thing like that before.
You're right, I said. I've never known your mother to be scared of anything. And it's unlike her to phone you in the middle of the night when she's worried about something, because you live so far away. And knowing Julie as I do, she wouldn't want to trouble you. Julie's always had her head on her shoulders. I personally believe your mother was incredibly brave to live in that old Victorian house all on her own, with only Bertie for company. She told me that during the night she'd often hear the house creaking and all kinds of noises, and that would certainly spook me. But Julie didn't worry about things like that. I still can't believe she fell down that staircase in the middle of the night. It's so shocking. I'm still trying to get my head around it. My mother was only saying over the breakfast table on the morning I found your mother lying deceased at the bottom of the staircase that she was decidedly worried about the fact that your mother slept upstairs. My mother was a nurse, you see. She's seen all kinds of tragedies as far as the elderly are concerned, and so many accidents down staircases. And she was scared your mother would take a fall down that staircase of hers if she wasn't careful enough. And then it happened. I was going to suggest that very morning that I went to see Julie that she needed to get a chairlift installed, for it was dangerous for her to walk up and down that sweeping staircase, especially her being the age she was. But I never got a chance to persuade her to do this. It's horrifying to think of it, that this could have been prevented. Ivor nodded sympathetically. Well, let's just say my mother wouldn't always listen to sound advice, would she? She refused to change her lifestyle, even when she knew very well her body was no longer as sprightly or as agile as it used to be. Let's just say, Cara, there's no fool like an old fool. I told my mother that if she wouldn't move to Florida with me, that she should at least let me pay for a lift to be installed in the house, so that she could go up and down the stairs without any problem at all, because she insisted in sleeping in the bedroom that she shared with my father. But you know my mother. She just simply refused. I hated the idea of her having to go up and down that staircase. I warned her that Bertie, in a moment of unbridled enthusiasm, could potentially rush past her and push her over by accident. But Mum refused to listen. I sent her a cheque to get that lift installed, but my mother never cashed it. What do you think happened that made her panic so much? That she would call you in the middle of the night like that? I asked. Well, it's all very bizarre, said Ivor, looking melancholic. I don't know. I wish I could answer your questions, dear. I really do. I just worry that my mother, getting as old as she was, that she might have been losing her marbles, perhaps. As on the cord during that ungodly hour of the night, she sounded terribly afraid. But she was compos mentos. I told her she needed to call the police at once, but of course that never happened. Ivor sighed wearily. I think in my mother's fright and obvious distress, she must have tripped on one of the steps and taken that fatal fall.
All I can hope is she didn't suffer, and that her death was instantaneous.
So there we are, that's the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.